This is VerDarLuz with Divine Timing Coaching and a new phase for all of us. It's Saturn and Pisces from 2023 until 2026. A brand new cycle of karma being released and karma yoga, our path of devotion, being unleashed. Saturn and Pisces is a whole new journey for each of us into our spirits. As I call this class, planting the seeds of the visionary. Saturn and Pisces, let's move through this cycle and how you're going to be affected by it. We'll also look at previous cycles when Saturn has been in Pisces, culturally, what's happened politically, economically. And we'll look back at the last few years where Saturn's been in his home signs of Capricorn and Aquarius. So let's look at this journey now with Saturn and Pisces. I wanted to start today with a prayer, and it's a prayer from Metta. Metta is an offering we do in Buddhist practices. Usually at the end of a practice, we'll dedicate that practice, or even sometimes before, and we dedicate it to the benefit of all beings, that all beings may realize their true selves. And so, since Pisces is such a spiritually oriented sign, the idea of constantly dedicating our practices, and our practices can be anything from eating our foods to, washing our laundry and our dishes, to walking the dog. If we can slow down enough to dedicate ourselves to offer what we're doing to a higher force, to a higher source, this is going to keep us connected during this really important cycle of Saturn and Pisces, where we need to be in a constant remembrance of our source, or of that force which is breathing through us, which is beating our hearts, which is actually doing everything through us. If we don't do that, if we don't stay connected and really build a disciplined Saturn around our spiritual connection, we may start to feel very depressed, very down, very lost, because the ego is quite dissolved in the sign of Pisces. And we'll explore this more as we go. But this is where the idea of dedicating our practice every day, the little things that we do, can go quite a long way for Saturn as he moves through Pisces. So planting the seeds of the visionary, in this journey, we want to offer this practice that all beings may be peaceful, that all beings may be happy, that all beings may be safe, that all beings may awaken to their light of their true nature, and may all beings be free. And I wanted to start the slideshow with a few images here. As we think about Saturn and Pisces, this is not a mental sign. This is a water sign. This is a sign of the imagination and of the dream body. And it's visionary realms. And it's really a much more nonlinear right brain journey that we're about to embark on. And so if you're watching the YouTube video, you can see this image before you. What does it start to conjure for you? Mythologies, places and times, legends, stories. There's sort of this bubbling of the collective unconscious and of transpersonal realms that start to channel through us as we take in visionary art. And here's another slide. And for Pisces, it really is usually visionary art, not so much about the personal, like a portrait or something along those lines. It's something that takes us to another time and place. It opens a portal to another dimension. And then we're invited to go into a great mystery. And we may be even challenged as we enter that portal into what our own sense of belief is, or our sense of faith is. But we are the actor in the dream. We're the writer in the dream. We're the producer and director of the dream. And this is something we really start to realize with Saturn moving into Pisces, is that we are living in this kind of dream or film, right? I can think of like the Truman Show, one of the great movies out there. has a very Saturn and Pisces, like this very meta perspective of like, okay, we're all kind of watching each other in this dream, and we're all each other's dream actors, you know? So Saturn, let's look at what Saturn means, right? Saturn is basically, Saturn is not subtle, right? When he moves through a sign, Saturn, let's just talk about that. When Saturn went into Aquarius, just a few months after that was the beginning of COVID. And he, you know, he gave us a lot during that cycle, which we'll talk about in a few moments. But Saturn is very, very much something that we collectively know is happening, right? It's not a subtle Neptune realm or anything like that. So here on the screen is an image of Saturn, and some of the key words we associate with Saturn, and discipline is one of them. So collectively, we have to discipline ourselves and become more responsible in whatever sign Saturn is in. And this will be true for the house that Saturn is transiting for 2.5 years in your chart. Now, that's a 2.5 year intense maturing phase of our life. And so we're going to mature the archetype of Pisces during this time. So just following with some of Saturn's themes, we can feel with Saturn like a sense of separation or solitude, a lot of boundaries and loss. You know, Saturn represents actually the winter time of the year. He rules Capricorn and Aquarius. The interesting thing is when Saturn's in Pisces, Pisces has no boundaries. So now this boundaried planet has to go through a process where it consciously is willfully, intentionally dissolving its boundaries. And so this is something we'll explore more as we continue to talk, but it may be, difficult to know at times, like what's mine and what's another's. There's a strong level of empathy when Saturn enters the water signs, Pisces, Cancer, and Scorpio. When we think of Saturn, there is a sense of kind of a limitation, a constriction. We can even sometimes feel failure. But really, Saturn is about being productive, accomplishment, ambition, and manifestation. And so the beauty of this cycle coming in is that we really have a potential to practically, realistically take a vision or a dream that we've had for so long and actually bring it into form. And it really is miracle consciousness, as A Course in Miracles talks about. It's something that we can take, paint a vision board, and within moments, really within days, weeks, or a call that we get on, that can be realized. And so then we have to be very intentional with what we are channeling, what we are invoking into our lives. This is a very magical type of transit that I think that Saturn invites us to actual ceremonial magic and those practices, but always that we're really in alignment with the higher source and the higher force, that we are in service to something beyond ourselves. I'm sharing here the mantra for Saturn, and the 7 planets we can see with our naked eye all have mantras. So this is a way that you can align with Saturn and bring Saturn into your life. And one of the best days to do this is Saturn's Day, which would be, a powerful time to work on this, power of boundary and hard work and discipline and effort. Saturn. Om Rim Shrim Shani Shraya Namaha. Om Rim Shrim Shani Shraya Namaha. So I discipline, I concentrate, I mature. This can be the affirmation for where Saturn is moving through your chart. And as we collectively experience the concentration of the archetype of Pisces, the maturity and the discipline around this in the coming years. So Saturn's been in Capricorn and Aquarius the last 5 years. Those are his home signs. We call it his own domicile. And so when Saturn's in his own domicile, it's extremely strong to do Saturn things. So that can be the rules, the regulations, the contractions, right? Of course, we lived through COVID during this. And have we ever seen such tight constrictions on our movement, right? Aquarius is a sign of freedom, and Saturn there actually, created a lot of limitation around that. And so we saw, we saw big businesses taking over a lot, especially around the media, which again has Aquarian type of flavor to it. And so but we also had those big businesses such as Facebook, Twitter, the entire, crypto worlds, like FTX, this company, Luna, this company. We saw that a lot of the leaders of these companies, right, have either been put in front of the Supreme Court with something like Facebook, right? And we've looked at the ethics around the social media, or we've looked at the ethics around some of these crypto companies and, investments, and taking people's money and basically putting it into virtual realms where they cannot actually pay it back. Another one would be Celsius. So we have this kind of Saturn bringing that karmic retribution, right, to this position that he's been in. Aquarius, Saturn journey there will touch the collective in a very powerful way. Aquarius and Pisces are both very collective signs. And so we're in this journey right now of really acknowledging ourselves as woven into a vast web of life. So Saturn in Aquarius has made us all very aware of the power of technology and the speed of it. And I think this is going to increase as we look at Saturn and Pisces. We're ending this cycle, on the cusp of all of this upsurgence of AI. And so we have ChatGPT, we have all of these AI technologies that are really going to accelerate our process in the coming years and take us towards that moment where we're going to be looking at something like the singularity of when artificial intelligence becomes more powerful than human, or we start to compare and contrast what is intelligence anymore, where do we end and machines begin. And these questions are going to come right to the fore. Of course, we've been playing with them for decades, right, or even centuries in science fiction, but now it's a time where we really have to ask some more serious questions about our ethical relationship with machines, with our laptops, and with our phones. And this is something that Saturn and Aquarius has really accelerated. We've seen a lot of challenge around people actually staying in their emotional body during this time, moving so quickly, whether that's through apps like Tinder, for dating, or, TikTok, and you have 6 seconds to get someone's attention, right? So what is that doing to us on the level of building a kind of anxiety and a kind of sense of instant gratification or lack of gratification, and also the bombardment with information, whether that's a song or a dance, or some kind of teaching or whatever it may be, but this almost constant sense of information just spewing at us from every direction. And this is going to affect us moving into Saturn and Pisces, where a lot of us are going to want and need more retreat, more meditation, more inner time, more quiet time. And so if we look at Saturn and Aquarius in your life and where that's been, you'd want to look at the house that Saturn has been in and ask yourself, how have I matured? Like a fine wine here. Whatever Saturn's house is where we ripen like the vine and we refine ourselves like the wine. And so what lessons have I learned? Where have I put in the hard work? And in essence, how have I gotten older here? If you look back a couple of years, 2.5 years, and you said, in a way, I kind of was premature at the beginning, and now I should be, an elder in this area. I should have matured and grown to a fuller capacity and put in some effort and seen some reward, but gone through a lot of resilience and probably some tension, stress, pressure, even some contraction at times, difficulties wherever Saturn has been. Well, now that's going to shift. And always when Saturn shifts signs, that's going to be the biggest peak moment in terms of feeling the shift. So this March 2023 is when we feel this, whoa, this is a pivot. And now I feel like the weight of the world is on my shoulders in this area, right? And if we don't finish the work of wherever Saturn was in the previous house, we have to kind of carry that weight over into the next house. So it's really important to take some time right now to really complete this journey of where Saturn's been for the last 2.5 years in your Aquarius house. And then let the fruits of that, the rewards of that, take you into building a solid foundation with where Saturn is going to be in Pisces. So consider the 3 most important changes in your life and the 3 lessons you learned in the last 3 years. So how will Saturn affect you in your chart? Well, we have a whole different video about this for every sign of the zodiac. But I want to give a nutshell here about what you may experience with Saturn and Pisces to prepare you. And just to begin with where Saturn was in Aquarius, of course, the fixed signs were going through a lot of challenge during this last 2.5 years. So that would be Leo and Aquarius, Scorpio, and Taurus. And that would be either an opposition or a conjunction or a square from Saturn, which that sense of heaviness or pressure or burden, a sense of a lot of more responsibility or some kind of constriction in our life could have been very, very strong for these signs. And now that same sense coming from Saturn can affect especially the mutable signs. Of course, Pisces, the conjunction, Virgo, the opposition, and then Gemini and Sagittarius, the square. These are called the hard aspects from Saturn here. And so again, we're looking at a real need to get very organized in our life. If we have planets in these signs, or if we have the angles, including the ascendant, the descendant partnership, and the self, or the IC, the angle of the home, or the MC, the angle of career. If you have that in Pisces, Virgo, Gemini, or Sag, you're really needing to really create some structure in your life. And Saturn may first restructure these parts of your life, meaning there might be a little bit of destruction happening there so that a stronger foundation can be laid and that you can build upon it. I always think of Saturn like a pyramid, and we are building the solid foundations, and then step by step, brick by brick, we are building towards our success. So that success may feel like it's very far away for some of the mutable signs during the beginning of this cycle, but hopefully by the end, we're going to feel that we've really accomplished quite a bit. And Saturn will reward you for the hard work, and these signs can be rewarded. But the signs that will feel the most flow from Saturn will be definitely the water signs of Cancer and Scorpio. You'll get the trine, and there'll be just a feeling of things much more being in their zone for you. And you might feel like a lot of success could come, especially professionally. And you definitely want to take advantage of that and make sure you do the hard work to follow through, and a lot of reward can come. You may find yourself in the right place at the right time with the right people to give you the responsibilities that you really do want, and your professional life can grow. But also, because this is the water element, it might be a time of great spiritual fulfillment for you and self-realization. Might be a creative and imaginative unfoldment in your life. And you may be doing new kinds of art forms or expressing them more out in the public. So really great for the Cancer and Scorpio types. And then also the earth signs, except for Virgo getting the opposition, you'll have the sextile, the creative and helpful energy from Saturn in Taurus and in Capricorn. So then if you're looking a little bit more Saturn in a day chart or a night chart, this will tell you more how you will experience this cycle. Saturn tends to do better in a day chart. He functions more well there, not as well in a night chart. Something to consider in your personal interpretations. And also, if you have a very well-placed Saturn, maybe he's in Capricorn, he's got some great trines in his position, you might experience Saturn's transits in a more flowing way. Also, if you have Saturn in his home signs of Capricorn or Aquarius, you can work with Saturn usually in a more productive way. You're very ambitious, the tendency is, and you can achieve and organize your life and build structures quite easily. And so, people that have a lot of Capricorn and Aquarius tend to do well with Saturn in their charts. So this is a summary of just a little bit. And again, we'll have this other video that you can check out about all of the signs. And I recommend you do that to learn more about how you will experience Saturn specifically in your chart. So Pisces' biggest shadows and wounds are escapism and addiction, victimization and martyrdom, and the question of faith. So faithlessness and can I really believe in anything? And these are the wounds that collectively we're going to be working with. And so as we talk through the rest of this journey through Saturn and Pisces, consider any areas of your life where you may be escaping, or you may have addictions. And we all tend to have addictions in our life. It can be food, it can be drugs, it could be alcohol, it could be media, it can be sex, all of these things that in any way take us out of the present moment, and that we have a kind of hook into, that we might not do so intentionally. And this idea of feeling like I'm a victim of something, or I have to play the role of the martyr. And so where Saturn is, there's also like a question of, faith, right? Pisces is a sign that the ego is naturally dissolving itself. And so a lot of us may feel like, we're in the middle of the ocean and we have nothing to hold on to, and it may be a storm coming in. And where's our faith going to be in those moments? What are we going to believe in? And I really feel like we're in a really powerful moment right now with this shift from Saturn in Aquarius to Pisces, because also in March of 2023, we have Pluto moving into Aquarius for the next 20 years. And as I talked about in my book, Aquarius Dawns, The Shamanic Artist and the Rise of the Wounded Healer, we have this really powerful pivot moment that all of us are ushering in with the way that we relate to ourselves, to each other, and to spirit. And in the Piscean age, we are ending this 2,000-year plus journey where we have played some of that role of victim and projected a savior outside of us, or a redeemer, through different religions, even different politicians and belief systems, and social structures, communism and capitalism, and all of these isms, right? And groups that we identify with. And those groups go in different directions, have different motives and, purposes. And that's like the two fish swimming in opposite directions of Pisces. In the Aquarian age shift that we're making, we have to get perspective, and so you have the water bearer, the one who's delivering the message, the one who's delivering civilization, in fact, scribing civilization with the waters of consciousness. And so what happens is that each one of us must become a creator, an artist, a writer of the new world we want to live in. It takes radical social responsibility when we move into the Aquarian age. We can't project anyone to blame or anyone to save us. And so this journey now, especially peaking, I think this decade, each one of us is making very powerful choices every day with who we're going to affiliate with, our Aquarian tribes, and how we're going to contribute to that, which would be the opposite of that, coming from the Leo axis, our creative potential that we're bringing, right? And so we have to own all of ourselves. And that's why languages like astrology and human design and numerology and IFS and all these other great tools are so important for us during this time, so that we know ourselves, so that we know our gifts, so that we can contribute in the highest potential to the awakening of the planet. And it's really an awakening to the fact that we are all one. We're not all of these competing ideologies. So here's some of the keywords for Saturn and Pisces as we see this image of Saturn on the Costa Rican beach. And it's about grounding our constant connection to source and living in sort of a mystical way day to day, having that sense of awe, magic, like we're living through the dream, and everything that we see and sense and taste, touch can open up an entire dimension of being. This is the idea that we're really living in God consciousness, that there's nothing that is not, as they say in Shaiva Tantra, that is not Shiva, right? Or is not God. Even the things that we would not prefer. And one of the ideas I really like from Japanese culture is wabi-sabi. It's a kind of artistic aesthetic. And it's about like when you see a pot that's cracked, or time has entered the art piece, and there's an appreciation for that. And so with Saturn and Pisces, we want to embrace the ephemeral. We want to embrace change. We also want to allow ourselves to have more archetypal therapy. And that means working on our deep psyche, working on those patterns and recognizing them and learning to acknowledge them and improve and evolve them. That's why, having tools like astrology and design, where we can see patterns in relationships in our life, family, colleague, lover, and we can start to evolve them by using those tools. This is going to be very important, where we can see our own patterns and learn, just like in the sign of Aquarius, like to detach enough to witness the pattern so that we can re-engage and then enter from a much deeper place of self-knowledge and a deeper intention and will. And so non-duality is really the essence of Pisces. It's the return to oneness. And so we're going to see our egos in action. We're going to see them out in the world very clearly during this cycle. And then we're going to look at how is the higher self in relationship to the ego, or in the Course in Miracles, they speak of the Holy Spirit. However, we can connect with that vaster, all-knowing part of ourselves in relationship to the ego that wants to remain separate and create stories of separation around it and blame and guilt. So the way we can do that is a lot through embodying more art and prayer and creativity every day, and having practical spiritual philosophies that guide us. It could be the Bhagavad Gita, it could be Stoicism, mindfulness practices, but we need to kind of yoke yoga ourselves into daily practices of connecting with something beyond and something that gives us meaning. And so the mythical pattern recognition within us, mythology may play a very strong role in all of our lives, and I imagine in the media in the coming years as well. And we can see the interdependent life, that we have this multi-dimensional consciousness, and wouldn't be surprising to see, more biology being found on other exoplanets and moons of our own planets of this star system. And of course, more and more people recognizing their starseed connections, their connections with, our galactic and interstellar and intergalactic families, whether that be the Pleiadian or the Sirian, the Vegan, or all the others. And more of us are going to have dreams and visions and psychedelic experiences where we attune to that vaster web of life. So we need languages now to support that, to know that we are part of something much vaster than we had considered before. And it may be that we have less economic growth, and Saturn is asking for more spiritual growth. And that when we look at Saturn and Pisces, we can also look at some of the keyword combinations of Saturn and Neptune. This is really important, actually, because by the end of this cycle with Saturn in Pisces, we're going to have Saturn conjunct Neptune right at the very first degree of Aries. And as most astrologers are considering, this marks a brand new moment in our collective consciousness. because that's known as the Aries point. And the Aries point is the beginning of the entire astrological year, of course, the spring season. But anything that touches that point usually marks a trigger point or a catalyst for collective consciousness. And so we are building towards something really, really profound, a big shift happening, whether that is that singularity with AI we're talking about, whether it's a mass disclosure event on the planet with our, galactic brothers and sisters. There's many possibilities. Maybe there's some, unfortunate kind of warlike energy going on at that time. It is Aries. But we do know that it's so valuable at this time and so important that we cultivate our spiritual connection, because we are moving to something really, really potent in just 2.5, 3 years here. So some of the other themes that we're going to see with Saturn and Pisces, and then once Saturn does get to Neptune by the very end of that cycle, is to really have a humble and grounded spirituality, to get centered and in integrity. And Saturn is all about these words, integrity. But there can be a sense of deflation, right? And the ego gets deflated. And we might see many falls from grace with this. We might see, again, those who have addictive patterns in the media, that get exposed very quickly. And that the ego has to really just bear itself. And, so that deflation, so modesty is going to be very important in this. We might feel some discontent, some depressive moments, and then we're going to need those spiritual practices to get us out of that, or to move through that, right? To embrace that and offer that again with grace, right? That everything that we're feeling and experiencing is actually part of the divine, right? We don't want to push anything away. This is very important teaching in most mystical traditions. So even if we're feeling uncertainty and doubt or disillusionment and disappointment, these are all Saturn and Pisces potentials, that we're losing our innocence, when we feel that suffering or that spiritual struggle, as many of the mystics say, that's when God is closest to us, because that's when we reach out. A lot of times when life is good and we're just having a great time, we don't remember that the reasons that we're having a good time, the way that we sense life and experience all the joys of it, are actually coming from something beyond ourselves. And that's the power of prayer. And I think that's going to be very important for a lot of us during this time. So having practical service as well that we give, more charity, is something we could see with this. And the practical application in our lives of forgiveness, letting go of the debts and all the baggage and the burdens we've been carrying spiritually, and with our relationships, and moving forward with kind of just letting go of all that, just a huge release, right? We're giving it to the great Mother Ocean, who's taking it all in and transmuting it for us, and turning it into the baptismal waters of cleansing and healing. This can be a very healing time for many collectives on the planet, many beings, but we will probably see some suffering as well. And there will tend to be a kind of collective suffering and a collective redemption. There's something very unifying with Saturn and Pisces that no one really gets out of, right? It doesn't matter what your position in life is or how much money you have. There's something during this cycle that we all experience that unites the field. And that's why the ego gets challenged during this time, because it wants to stay separate and in its story of, being better than or worse than or any of that. And this is what we have to tame and temper during this cycle. And I love the quote from William Blake: "To see a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wildflower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour." It's this beautiful Piscean expression of every moment containing every other moment, or even the Hermetic maxim of as above, so below. So how to avoid the disappointment and disillusionment, and commit to daily practice. So again, what's your intentional prayer? What is your offering? An emotion you're feeling, if the anger rises, can you pause just for a moment and lift and send that out to the source of the anger, which in tantras is known as Shakti. It's like all this energy has to move, right? It's moving through us, but we don't have to get identified with it necessarily, right? Same with a thought, like I'm not good enough, or, you just have to compete to win, right? Or any of these thoughts that just start to take us over, right? Or even a sensation of pain, right? Or any sensation that we have, it's about not attaching to it. And this is where the non-dual teachings, Buddhist and Shaiva Tantra, Taoism, the Bhagavad Gita, and really staying in that Christ consciousness or Buddha mind can be so, so powerful, right? Daily prayer, 5 times a day prayer, right? In Islam, what great medicine that is for us to turn to our source 5 times a day. How that pulls us back to, the one who gave us time. Take some time to remember the one who gave us time, right? Regular shamanic ceremony and breath work and medicine work can be extremely powerful during this cycle, right? To move through any depression, but also to connect us with our deeper selves, our spiritual selves. Will contribute in a big way during Saturn's movement in Pisces to our collective dream. And we've already seen this with Saturn and Aquarius bringing us ChatGPT and AI-assisted everything at this point, right? We have Alexas in our house. We have, all of these technologies for marketing now being done by AI. And we would expect this to grow, and as well, virtual realities and augmented realities, right? Where we're getting a lot of information, like sort of multi-layered into every moment that we experience. So again, that bombardment that we talked about before, we have to be very careful to be overwhelmed with that during this cycle of Saturn and Pisces. And we may be questioning what's real and what's not, as we said, what's AI and what's human. This question of boundaries dissolving between realities could be very, very strong. Even like who's a leader and who's not, in terms of politics, that question could be up. And then we also have the theme of solitude. Saturn, the last planets that we could see with our naked eye, Saturn in tradition was always seen as, going up to the mountain, praying in the cave, being alone, fasting. So we might see an upsurge of like fasting diets and maybe new research about the benefits of fasting, a lot more people doing it, but just a general asceticism, maybe a sense of getting a little bit bored with and kind of annoyed with and irritated with the hedonistic lifestyle of capitalism and what we've been promoting collectively. So that's something that we should all look at, what is my relationship to my sensory realm? And, is it time to maybe take a break during this Saturn and Pisces cycle, which also says maybe I need a retreat. Maybe I need a 2-week, a month, a sabbatical. Maybe I need a Vipassana meditation, silent meditation retreat. Silence can be a great way to work with this cycle, especially because being is more important than doing. We've been spending all of our time and energy doing so much. And so there is sense of a tragic quality to this, because again, the ego is always wanting to like accomplish and do, right? And, make itself known. And so we can pick up on certain archetypes during this, like the tragic romantic poet, if you think of Shelley or a Keats or a Wordsworth, beautiful poetry, but there's always that tinge of melancholia that we associate with Saturn and with some of that poetry. some of the best emo bands in the world, you know, if you go back to that time frame in your own youth, perhaps, or you may want to listen to some of those bands. And then you could also think about how the arts are going to be transforming over the coming years. They will guide us. They will transform us and transport us into a new self-reflexive possibility of who we are. I do really think that synesthesia and hybridizing and collaging, these are all very Piscean kinds of art forms, right? So it's not that Pisces is one thing, it's everything all at once, like the movie that came out recently. And so we have, you know, taking, for instance, I've been in a hybrid memoir class, and the idea of taking like recipes and Post-it notes and, you know, report cards and, you know, different things that you might not think of as literary and actually integrating them into your, you know, your memoir, right? And so it's like all the writing styles and all the kinds of ways that we can create a book could all come together in a single text, right? And this could be true for any art form, right? And so we're going to see, I believe, an incredible movement in the arts where, you know, the music and the dance and even the touch and all of the senses are really going to inform each other in a way that will be probably very inspiring and ask us to consider how we want to create. And so what is a poet or a spiritual text or a dancer or even a filmmaker that inspires you the most? And maybe you can reflect on what that work does to your imagination. Maybe there's a way you could even mimic some of that work, the style of it. So what artistic or imaginative So what artistic or imaginative practice could you commit to every day? You know, the cultivation of the artist Piscean archetype in you and that ability to channel, to receive. The Piscean artist is not so much a technician, but more of a channel. And we should expect that channeling will become more widespread, more widely accepted during this cycle of Saturn and Pisces, and that will open up more and more our multidimensional awareness. And this will include exoconsciousness, or our connection to alien life forms, intergalactic, interdimensional beings, our star families, our star tribes that we come from. It could be the Pleiadian or Sirian families, but many, many others. And also the spirit world, our ancestral realms, the animal spirits. We may just start to sense that the veil between the worlds is much thinner during this time, and we can receive messages from the beyond through our dreams, through art, through symbol, through increased synchronicity, through so many serendipitous types of moments, or, you know, the road signs speaking to us as we drive by, right? Or the names and the numbers repeating. It's kind of like living the dream every day of our lives. And myth and archetypally based therapy can be extremely powerful during this next couple years. You know, karma, we always talk about associated with Saturn and the sort of karmic retribution, like something has come of time. Yeah. Saturn is Chronos, Lord of time. And so we're looking at healing and connecting to, becoming very aware and sort of sculpting, you know, the karmas in our life, from the most personal and individual to the familial and the ethnic and the national and the global to the universal. And so we're really taking a more systematic or systems approach to the self. And this can be, looking at our birth trauma, looking at past and parallel and future lives, right? And the sense of even calling in other parts of ourselves, which is a big part of shamanism and soul retrieval. But we may be doing that from, different decisions we've made at parts of our lives that we want to sort of go back to and say, what if I went in this direction, right? Kind of, multiple realities happening at the same time, and actually harnessing some of the information, the wisdom, the experience from maybe if I chose a different path. And in a way, a lot of modern science says that if you follow the parallel universe theory, right, that whenever we make a decision, we actually form another universe. And in this Saturn Pisces time, we may be at the precipice of really being able to access that in some very practical ways, especially as Pluto moves into Aquarius as well. And so again, working with archetypes through astrology and human design and numerology as well, this will be very powerful. Working with mythical storylines. I like to work with the asteroids and with fixed stars when I do readings, and they're all based in the mythology that you carry in your soul, and they're very specific storylines that tell you a kind of journey that your soul is incarnating with, and can actually be quite healing because it can weave you into a larger fabric of story and meaning and purpose. And so if you would ask yourself, what would the title of my memoir be? That can be a great way to enter into this Saturn and Pisces time. And you might be really drawn to doing a lot more reflective journaling, joining a memoir class of some kind. It can be really powerful, maybe a poetry class, but more contemplative arts, more contemplative practices are going to be really beneficial during Saturn's movement through Pisces. And then angels, ascended masters, gods and goddesses. Which ones can you build a relationship with during this time? Maybe that you can call on. The Stoics have a practice, and it's actually also a practice in Tantra, is to kind of consider a master, a sage, a wise one, or a deity that is right there on your shoulder, when you're needing to make some big decisions in your life, or if you want to really, again, act with integrity and make every act an act of devotion, and you can feel that presence of the deity or the master or the sage right there with you. What does that do to how we live our lives, to how we approach each other, how we speak? And we become very present to what A Course in Miracles calls the only problem. Our only problem during Saturn and Pisces, we become aware of the fact that we have this idea of separation that we attach to. And we will become aware that we can really be in this unified field more and more and more during this time. And if we resist that, this is where we may start to suffer more. And there's some really beautiful practices from the Vijnana Bhairava, which is one of the great tantric scriptures, Shaiva Tantra scriptures. And the cloud gazing is one of my favorite because it's so easy to do, but it's actually a pathway to realize your divine self-nature. And the verse 84, it says, looking at the clear sky with uninterrupted gaze, remaining completely still, all at once, O goddess, one attains the form of Bhairava. And Bhairava is the fierce nature of Shiva, or the sort of the penetrating truth of Shiva, of the pure awareness of God consciousness. And so this idea of looking up at the sky and without blinking, without closing our eyes, just basically letting ourselves completely melt into sky consciousness. And the sense that the sky holds everything. The sky holds every cloud that moves through it, every passing, by metaphor, every passing emotion, every passing thought, every passing sensation. And so it's a beautiful practice to look up at the empty sky, the blue sky without any clouds, and just let your consciousness, ascend and expand into this vastness. And this is, again, one of the great tantric practices in the 120 dharanas, or concentrations, in the Vijnana Bhairava. There's another one that says, wherever the mind goes, whether towards the exterior or towards the interior, everywhere there is the state of Shiva. Since Shiva is omnipresent, where can the mind go to avoid him? Now, in place of Shiva, you could put God, you could put Allah, you could put Krishna, you could put Buddha, you could put Christ. The point is that this verse is inviting us to transcend the dualities, the concepts of exterior and interior, because, again, it is only through my senses, it's only through my awareness that I can sense, right? Awareness is primary. So in a way, all of us are living inside this great, vast awareness. And this is what is called Shiva in the tradition. So nothing is actually outside. It's all within us. This is a profound meditation to really practice on a daily basis. And it will shift your awareness of beings or things out there, as opposed to being inside your awareness. So these are kinds of really, really fun and important practices we can do during Saturn and Pisces. And I love working with the Stoic masters and their teachings, where we are constantly reminded by Epictetus or Marcus Aurelius or Seneca that really it's all about only focusing on those things that we can actually control. As Marcus says, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. So Epictetus says men are disturbed not by things, but by the judgments and opinions they take of them. So there's that sense of like, life is happening as it must happen, but how we relate to it is where our spiritual growth lies, our character building that the Stoics are so focused on, our integrity. And so they talk about, not focusing on things you can't control or the externals, and that you'll have more time, you'll be more energized, you'll be happier, you won't be complaining. And so for a question, what is the area of life that you're trying to control the most? And what would it be like to completely give up control there? What kind of freedom might be on the other side of that area you're trying to control if you just let go? And I want to share a quote from the really esteemed mythologist and astrologer Liz Green about Saturn in Pisces. The real potential of Saturn in Pisces is unfortunately only available now to those of a mystical bent who are inclined toward the path of inner contemplation. The positive gifts of this placement include the power to serve others and to experience the sense of unity, which the mystic is forever seeking, and the sense of responsibility and detached love, which accompanies this unity. And this is from her book, Saturn, A New Look at the Old Devil. And I'd say it's fortunate, actually, that it's those of us on a mystical bent, because it's going to actually ask us to tap into our spiritual selves. It's about time, yeah? It seems like the planet really, really needs that. And so now I want to share with you a few minutes around previous cycles of Saturn in Pisces, the last 3 cycles, culturally, politically, what we might see socially. And this is very helpful to understand where we might be going. And then just as an overall theme, when you think about the earth changes that are just so strong at this point of our lives, with all of the natural disasters we felt in the last few years, when you think of course, Pisces, you think of the ocean. And we do think that there's going to be some earth changes related to the ocean. Maybe it has to do with fishing, maybe something with the dolphins and the whales or the kelp and the coral. We could also see that drought and famine and sort of periods of that could be very strong, where there's not enough water or there's too much water. So then you have flooding, or even tsunamis, right? At places that maybe never get water suddenly get tons of water. Places that always have water now never have water. You know, and this could also be, again, just as we see with winter being sort of abandoned in a lot of Europe and other parts of the world. You know, this winter, not enough snow, ski resorts closed. So we could see things like that more and more with Saturn in Pisces. So if we look at these cycles, let's start with the oldest one first, February 1935 to January 1938. And this was a time when fascism was really growing in Europe. And this was when Franco was starting the Spanish Civil War. You know, Hitler was really, you know, spreading in popularity in Germany, but starting to kill, quote unquote, undesirables. And you had Stalin still in the Soviet Union, and he was becoming very paranoid, trying to hang on to power, and began something called the Great Purge in 1936 to remove enemies, imprisoning and killing millions. You know, it's something in China that was going on, of course, was the Red Army established, and it was the rise of power of Mao Zedong. And in the US, this was the time when Roosevelt was really working with the consequences of the Great Depression and the drought that caused the Dust Bowl. So again, we see the drought there, right? So again, these things tend to repeat. So it sounds pretty negative, right? But you can see that there's like these collective movements happening, right? Now, in culture, there was some highlights and some really interesting first. For instance, the Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was the first feature-length animated film. And you see this process of animation growing during Saturn and Pisces. We'll see it in the next couple cycles too. Dr. Seuss's first children's book came out, and that was called And to Think That I Saw It on Mulberry Street. And then you have one of the most well-respected books of all time, actually, about the Depression, from John Steinbeck, of Mice and Men, came out during this time. So the depressive energy, you know, is present in the collective, right? And even turned into this sort of artistic expression. And could be right now with the economic downturn that there's, you know, some kinds of art that gets born of this, whether that's, you know, literary or poetic, right? Or through cinema or multimedia. And then you have the publication of Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And I think this is fascinating because still today, entrepreneurs are reading this book, and it's so much about the law of attraction. And that's very, very much the nature of Saturn and Pisces. As we said, it's basically like the veil is so thin that if I think about it, if I put in sometimes even the littlest amount of effort, it can be manifested. And Think and Grow Rich, right? Napoleon Hill. This was also Tolkien publishing The Hobbit, right? And we can see fantasy, right, as a very Piscean theme. And something probably very profound is going to happen here with, you know, cinema and video games. And I wouldn't be surprised if those worlds just get more and more melded and merged. And even, you know, more performances of video game music, that kind of thing. You know, if you go to the 1960s, the middle of the 60s, this was when the Vietnam War was escalating and the anti-war protests were happening around the world. Again, collective movements. Young men in the US were burning their draft cards. 20,000 Buddhist protests against the military government. There were also all the civil rights marches going on and race riots in the US. Black Power was really rising. Martin Luther King led the Selma to Montgomery marches in 1965. And then you had the Black Panther Party formed in 1966. unfortunately, Malcolm X, the leader of this movement, was assassinated, and the KKK committed multiple murders in Mississippi. So you have these, again, that Piscean, that competing mythologies and storylines, unfortunately not being transcended into that unity state, but actually battling against each other. Interestingly, in terms of psychedelics and entheogens and medicines, in the US, LSD was made illegal, and scientific research was shut down. And there's that Saturn kind of control from the government coming in. But I wonder if that, may in this cycle, would that look like further constrictions from governments, or is that going to actually open up, right? Because it seems to be that it might be opening up more, right? With, especially in states like Oregon and Colorado and different counties and cities having much more ability, or in Oakland, California, to legalize psilocybin mushrooms, MDMA, ketamine, these all now cannabis being used by therapists, right? And what we might see in terms of new research that can come out with the ability for us now to go back into scientific research and actual, practical engagement therapeutically with clients through psychedelics and entheogens, and again, meditation as well, but a more holistic approach to working with the psyche, where it's less, just about talking, but actually full embodiment experiences. And I think group ceremony is going to become much more important and have a sense of a real importance for us to commit to. And that can be with medicines or with breath work or other modalities. Also in the 60s, we had the Star Trek series was premiered. And that's really important, because I think, again, when you go to the next cycle, which is in the 90s, 93 to 96, which a lot of you were probably around for, you might remember that the X-Files was probably the #1 show, and everyone was pretty obsessed with it. And so again, we get this sense, like we were saying, of opening up to these other dimensions of consciousness and our alien families, alien civilizations. So that seems to be something that, again, the 90s speak to. In the 90s also, we had, in terms of politics, Nelson Mandela became president, and later, abolished capital punishment in South Africa. And this was so monumental and life-changing for the entire country. And then we see that this is where it gets very interesting in terms of media, because the first PlayStation game was launched during those years, 93 to 96, May 93 to April 96. And there was also Jurassic Park coming out with this crazy CGI at the time. And it was actually the biggest grossing film for the next 4 years. Lion King came out and was the highest grossing animated film. So huge, popularity of animated films. But then you had Toy Story come, and this was the first full-length computer animated film to be released. And so you had, again, a lot of these firsts coming around animation. And my sense is that there's some kind of either new type of animation, or it might be more around, augmented realities, 3D realities, or even, like a better version of some of the cinemas that have the sort of immersive experiences, what do they call it? Like 4X or RPX or something like that, where, you're having this full sensory experience. That could become much more popular, integrated, refined during this Saturn and Pisces cycle. So much more occurred during that time. I just want to share with you on the video here, there's actually a number of the albums that came out in 94, 95. Of course, there was hundreds, thousands, but these are some of these are legendary, right? And we don't listen to music the same way, right? This was the time before Spotify, or a lot of the streaming services were popular. And so you have these like classics, like the downward spiral from Nine Inch Nails, or Holes Live Through This, Dummy from Portishead, Super Unknown from Soundgarden, right? Stone Temple Pilots, Purple. I mean, how many times did we hear songs off of that album? Or you have another legend in sort of her own realm. No one sounded ever and will ever sound like Tori Amos. Under the Pink came out during this time, and of course the notorious B.I.G. Ready to Die. And these are like classics, right? Green Day's Dookie, Ill Communication from Beastie Boys. So Nirvana's MTV Unplugged, right? And then in 95, you have, these other classics coming out in the beginnings of like, Radiohead's The Bends, right? And look at what happens with Radiohead and who they become in the collective. And you have Smashing Pumpkins, Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, and just an incredible album, and just, leaving their legacy on the planet. And Bjork's Post, known as one of the most revolutionary albums of all time, and bizarre and crazy, and sets her up to be a cult artist, right, in the collective. So so much interesting music. And maybe you see these guys on tour again, right, if they're still around, right? Or maybe you go back to these bands and they mean a lot during this cycle. But there is something interesting to explore with some of the previous music and films that were coming out at these different times. So lastly, here we want to look at some famous people, and there's many of them, but I just wanted to share some famous actors and musicians, and even a director here that have Saturn in Pisces. One of them, Robert Downey Jr. And it's interesting to look at this list because addiction has come up for a few of these people in their lives. Robert Downey as well. But maybe, he comes out with a really interesting new role during this time. It wouldn't be uncommon to see someone actually come into an Oscar nomination or an Oscar win, including someone recently like Brad Pitt during his Saturn return, his second Saturn return, with Oscar, nominations and all of that. So you see here the very esteemed Viola Davis. She's been very popular lately. And then you see Selma Hayek and Helena Bonham Carter and Kurt Cobain, and unfortunately Kurt, who was also a Pisces sun, he committed suicide before his Saturn return, but he did have Saturn in Pisces. And of course, the legend in the entire grunge movement and in all of our lives who grew up during that time, including my own. And another really fascinating character is Ridley Scott, one of the most well-respected and prolific of filmmakers. You can go through the list: Alien, Gladiator, Blade Runner, what's the movie about the Crusades? Very, very popular, extremely powerful director, Prometheus. And it's interesting to note that in 2024, Ridley Scott will be actually releasing the next Gladiator installment. So right on time during Saturn in Pisces, his third Saturn in Pisces, we'll see the next Gladiator. So this is quite fascinating to look at how these artists, they kind of return to form and often offer something really, really powerful during their Saturn returns. So I want to leave you today with some visionary art images for you to explore during Saturn's movement into Pisces. We said that art and the imagination is going to be extremely powerful, and the idea of storytelling or poetry writing with the arts, the hybridization, the synesthesia. So I want to invite you to take a look at these images and just to be with them for a few moments. And if you like to write a poem or stream of consciousness writing, feel free. It's been wonderful to share today about Saturn and Pisces with you. If you like this video, definitely subscribe, share it. If you like the podcast, thanks for subscribing. And definitely tune in to Saturn and Pisces in your chart through all the signs in another video, another podcast. Thank you. All the best as Saturn unfolds in the sign of the fishes in the coming years. Namaste.